Good morning, everyone. Let us continue with the elegy written in a country churchyard. I would today begin where we stopped yesterday. Let me first of all recite the stanza and then we shall continue with the discussions. One by one, we'll discuss each and every stanza as we have been doing with the elegy earlier. Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bear. Full many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness on the desert air. Gray has pointed out here that just as so many precious gems lie buried deep in the unfathomable caves of the sea or ocean, and so many fragrant flowers bloom and blossom in loneliness, and nobody admires their fragrance or their beauty. Similarly, the rustics had also many talents which could not find expression and were buried with them without coming to the light of the people around. These are often quoted lines of Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard, and by means of two comparisons or two illustrations, the poet has emphasized the fact that the poor village folks died unknown, and if they died unknown, it doesn't mean that they had nothing good or they had no talent in them. In fact, they could not get favorable circumstances or favorable opportunities to develop and expand their talents. The poet compares them, that is, these poor folk, village folk, to that of the brightest gems that the darkest and deepest caves of the ocean contain. Just as the beauty and brilliance and shining of the gems remain hidden from the eyes of the world on account of the depth of the sea, the unfathomable depth of the sea, in the same way, the genius and talents and the brilliance of the dead farmers, the poor villagers, were not admired by the world on account of their extremely poor condition. Again, they are not admired. Again, just as the flowers that blossom in the lonely places or in the desert are not admired by anyone, similarly, none outside the village could know and admire the good qualities of these poor villagers, and they could not grow because of extreme poverty. Thus, the talents which the poor rustics had could not come to life, could not blossom because of poverty, and those talents were buried with them. Next stanza. Some village Hampden that with dauntless breast the little tyrant of his fields withstood. Some mute inglorious Milton here may rest, some Cromwell guiltless of his country's blood. The dead rustics might have become great men like Hampden, Milton, or Cromwell, points out Gray, but they could not raise themselves to the stature of Hampden, Milton, or Cromwell, or simply because their talents could not get chances to develop. In the elegy, the poet has pointed out that in this house there once lived the daughter of Cromwell and the recently discovered cast of the Protector hidden within a wall, Hughes knows West and all. A letter of his written on the field of Marston is on view, Stoke Porges, where Gray wrote his elegy. It is about half an hour by motor, and he didn't realize before why he wrote these examples of greatness of Hampden, of Milton, or of guiltless Cromwell. The nation owns this fine house now as a gift of Lord Lee of Fulham, used by the Prime Minister when in office as his weekend residence. This is about the place where he has written the poem, and the explanation now goes like that Thomas Gray, while lamenting the obscure lot of the villagers buried in the churchyard, contemplates that but for the lack of opportunities, these villagers would become famous. He says that some of them might have been as bold and courageous as Hampden, who opposed the ship money tax levied by the King Charles I. This fellow would have stood against the tyranny of his landlord. Someone would have risen to the greatness of Milton, the great poet, who has written an epical poem, Paradise Lost, but died without writing any poem, without composing a line even, and without making for themselves a name as great as Milton, the poet, was. Or someone would have become a great statesman like Cromwell, the first head of the British Commonwealth, who in his fight against King Charles I shed so much blood of his countrymen. The buried villagers had all these qualities, but they failed to develop them because of the lack of proper opportunities. Thus, the first remained a patriot on small scale, opposing his tyrant landlord. The second died with his poetic fire in his heart, but without writing any poem. The last mentioned, though he might have risen to the greatness of Cromwell, was saved from shedding so much blood of his countrymen. He remained free from this guilt. So, what has been pointed out here by Gray is that though they had talent, they could not develop their talent because of the lack of opportunities, yet these people were saved from certain vices also, which he will point out in the next stanza. The applause of listing senates to command, the threats of pain and ruin to despise, to scatter plenty over a smiling land and read their history in a nation's eye. In these lines, Gray has pointed out again that their poverty prevented these poor villagers from becoming good senators and rulers. In substance, Gray says that the extreme poverty came in the way of the growth of many good qualities of these humble villagers. Some of the buried farmers might have become members of the parliament and made triumphant speeches. If they had the opportunity, they would have charmed the audience by their oratorial fervor and skills. Had they been given proper opportunity, they would have boldly challenged the threats of oppression and destruction shown by the tyrant ruler. They would not have failed in compelling the government to cancel the unjust taxes and to spread rain of plenty over a land in prosperity. Thus, they might have added to the happiness of the people and enjoyed praise and respect in the eyes of the people, which would later on be recorded in the history of the country. But all these qualities were snubbed and they remained unnoticed due to their obscure fate. Yes. Next stanza. Their lot forbid, nor circumscribed alone their growing virtues, but their crimes confined. Forbade to wade through slaughter to a throne and shut the gates of mercy on mankind. As I had pointed out earlier, their obscure fate not only checked the growth of their talents, but it also limited their crimes. Gray defends the obscure lot of the humble rustics buried outside the church in the neglected part of the graveyard. He says that no doubt poverty dampened the genial current of the soul and thwarted the development of their spirit, their courage, or their talents, but at the same time it also saved them from the crime of shedding blood of the innocent people of their country. Thrones are often captured after shedding pools of blood, as we see in many of the wars across the globe. Such rulers banish all the feelings of mercy and compassion and pity from their hearts, and they become relentless while ruling the people with iron hand. But the poor villagers were free from this crime because of their humble lot. Next stanza. The struggling pangs of conscious truth to hide, to quench the blushes of ingenious shame, or heap the shrine of luxury and pride with incense kindled at the muse's flame. The humble villagers did not feel any pain or shame because they were simple and innocent. Gray suggests that poverty also limited the growth of the crimes in the buried villagers. It not only suppressed the development of their genius and talent but also saved them from so many crimes. He says that often it is seen that the rich people have to conceal truth and have to struggle painfully to hide it. They have to choke the voice of conscience to conceal shame at any of their actions which are not virtuous. But the villagers were free from these pains and anguishes or guilts. They did not hide the truth and felt shame freely when they did so. They did not speak patronage of the rich men by composing poems full of flattery to praise them. They did not sell their truth and honesty for a few gold pieces. Let's continue the next stanza. Far from the madding crowd's ignoble strife, their sober wishes never learned to stray. Along the cool, sequestered vale of life, they kept the noiseless tenor of their way. This is also an often quoted line, and far from the madding crowd. This phrase has been picked by Thomas Hardy as a title of one of his famous novels, which is titled as Far from the Madding Crowd. Yes, let's come back to Gray, and Gray has highlighted the fact that the simple, poor villagers lived a peaceful and retired life far from the hustle and bustle and noise of the world. Gray shows how the villagers lived happily, free from the noise, the fever, the fret of city life. They lived quietly, away from the crowd of the city people who are mad for wealth and fame. Here we are reminded of Wordsworth also, who in his poem "The World is Too Much with Us" has tried to deride the urge of the people, the yearning of the people to accumulate material wealth. We'll discuss the poem later on, which is there as part of your syllabus. These poor villagers were free from the mean struggle and the cutthroat competition which characterized the city life and make life not only difficult but also corrupt. Their wishes were gentle and sober and never deviated from the noble and virtuous principles and paths of life. They happily pursued their everyday work in quiet and calm atmosphere, and they retired to the countryside, peace and serenity. Let us move to the next. Yet even these bones from insults to protect, some frail memorial still erected nigh, with uncouth rhymes and shapeless sculpture decked, implores the passing tribute of a sigh. In spite of their obscure life, some frail or weak memorials have been erected or constructed near the graves to protect the bones of these poor villagers from dishonor. Dr. Johnson comments, I quote here, "The four stanzas beginning, 'Yet even these bones are to me original. I have never seen the notions in any other place, yet he that reads them here persuades himself that he has always felt them.' The dead forefathers had no ambition and could not rise high. They were buried in the neglected spot outside the churchyard. Unlike the rich, whose graves were provided with stately monuments and honor, they did not have any such memorial or honor. But to protect their bones from dishonor, some simple and humble memorials have been constructed over their graves. There are at least some poorly composed poetic lines engraved or inscribed on the tombstones. There are some ugly engravings upon their graves to decorate them. These frail or weak memorials with poorly composed poetic lines and shapeless sculpture represent their longing to be remembered even after death, which is very natural because every human being born on this earth has a desire to be remembered after death. He or she wants to live in the memory of his descendants. They appeal to the heart of the passers-by, who take a deep sigh to show their sympathy and thus pay tribute to the villagers buried in their graveyards. Next stanza, their name, their years, spelt by the unlettered muse, the place of fame and elegy supply, and many a holy text around she strews that teach the rustic moralist to die. Gray points out that the names and years of birth and death are inscribed or engraved on the memorials of these villagers. Some holy texts that teach the rustic moralist to die simply are also engraved here. Gray further points out that the engravings on the tombstones of the villagers were not correctly written. They were poor, so they could not afford to get an educated script writer or composer or a good stone cutter to beautifully write and correctly inscribe what they desired to be written on their graves. Their names, years of birth, and deaths have been inscribed on their tombs incorrectly by the uneducated composer or the stone cutter. These engravings serve them as an eulogy or elegy. Further, the unlettered verse marker or stone cutter has also inscribed a few lines from the Holy Bible, which during their life taught them to reconcile themselves to death and die cheerfully without caring for the temporary joys of the world. Let's continue with the next stanza. For who to dumb forgetfulness a prey, this pleasing anxious being ever resigned, left the warm precincts of the cheerful day, now cast one longing, lingering look behind. In this stanza, Gray has described the longing of the dead men, the poor villagers or village folk, and their desires to be remembered even after death. In these lines of the elegy, Gray has described the natural instinct or natural desire of any man born on this earth to be remembered after death. Nobody likes to quit this life, which, though full of joys and sorrows, is very pleasing to him. He feels the pains of separation from those who are dear and near to him. He does not want to be forgotten after death, and when he dies, he casts a prolonged and regretful look behind. It is why some memorials, although they are frail and shapeless, have been erected upon the graves of the poor rustics. Forgetfulness has been personified here, and it stands here as a figure of speech called personification. Next stanza. On some fond breast the parting soul relies, some pious drops the closing eye requires. Even from the tomb the voice of nature cries, even in our ashes live their wonted fires. Yes, the same thought is continued here. In the previous stanza, the longing, lingering look has been often quoted as an example, as a very good illustration of alliteration. And I come back to this stanza, and with this I would like to open my discussion on the desire of every human being to be remembered after death. Gray points out here that everyone wants to be remembered after death, and at the time of death, everyone wishes that someone dear and near to him should weep for him, should remember him, should keep one's memories alive even after death. We find here a very fine description of human psychology. The poet says that love is the base of human existence in this world, and it is only on the basis of love that one who dies keeps himself or herself alive in the memories of the living descendants. The older a man grows, the greater desire for love he feels. Even at the time of death, he does not forget it. When he dies, he wishes that those who are near and dear to him should shed tears. He hopes that they will remember him even after his death. They will miss their presence. Even after death, this longing does not end when one is mixed with dust and one is buried in the grave. Even at that time, this wish to be remembered after death lives in the heart of every human being. Let us give a pause here. We shall continue with the remaining parts of the elegy in our next discussion. Thank you.